Move it along, ma'am. This isn't your neighborhood. This isn't your bench.
A few mothers by the swings turned to watch.
I need your ID.
Why?
I said move.
There's a sign at the entrance.
I know what the sign says.
Then you know I read it. Criminal trespass under Georgia Code requires notice and refusal to depart. Neither has been given.
You want to play lawyer with me?
I'm stating the law.
Fletcher steps closer. Behind him, Detective Boyce keeps one hand on his radio and the other near his unsnapped holster.
I'm giving you a lawful order.
Then give it clearly.
You will comply!
No!
Get up!
Dispatch, Boyce, we need backup at the park entrance now. Ma'am, you need to come with us.
Female subject removed from bench. Use of force by Sergeant Fletcher.
You struck me before giving notice.
You were told to move.
No, I was threatened.
The mothers pull their children closer. Requesting supervisor and timestamp.
Now it's on record.
Somewhere in an air-conditioned room half a mile away, a dispatcher named Amber Forrester noted the timestamp on her console. 4:19 p.m. She wrote it twice, once on the official record and once in a plain composition notebook she kept in the top drawer of her workstation, the notebook she had been keeping for 3 years and told no one about. The cuff clicked twice, and then, for one long second, nobody in Fairview Park moved at all. To understand how she ended up on that bench, we have to walk back to the beginning of the day, because nothing about that Sunday was an accident. She had eaten breakfast at Miss Ida's Diner, 3 blocks north of Cypress Row Public Housing, on a stool at the counter she had chosen because it faced the door. The waitress had brought her coffee without asking, refilled it twice, and on the second refill, glanced at the plain jacket and the plain shoes and the plain haircut and said, "You visiting somebody, sweetheart?" It was not exactly a question. The woman at the counter had smiled the smile people wear when they are choosing not to answer. She left $3 on top of a $12 check and walked out into the heat. Her name was Naomi Ambrose. She was 41 years old. She had grown up 2 miles from that diner, in a small brick house on Pinehurst Avenue, and she had eaten her first strawberry milkshake in a booth by the window when she was 6. Her mother had worked nights cleaning offices at the county courthouse, and her father had died before Naomi turned 11. She had left Brackenridge County at 18 and had not been back in almost a decade. Nobody at Miss Ida's Diner recognized her, and she was not going out of her way to be recognized. She had come home to walk the streets before she started a job on Monday morning. She wanted to see the place the way an outsider saw it. She wanted to feel it under her feet before anyone told her what it was supposed to feel like. She folded her paper napkin into precise thirds before she stood up. She scanned the 2 exits without thinking about it, the way a person scans exits when they have been trained a long time ago to know where the doors are. The habit was so old, she no longer knew she was doing it. If you find yourself nodding at that detail, tap the like button. This story is about to move fast, and it helps other people find it. 2 men in the second booth watched her leave. One of them wore a golf shirt and a wedding band and the sunburn of a Saturday spent on a boat. The other wore a plain dark t-shirt over a service belt he had partially covered with the hem, and a haircut that had not changed in 15 years. They did not speak until the bell over the door had stopped ringing. "Was that her?" the sunburned one said. "Couldn't be. She'd have called ahead. They always call ahead." "They said she was younger." "They said a lot of things." The sunburned one, whose name was Cassian Boyce, tapped his phone twice and put it back in his pocket. The other, Karl Fletcher, drained his coffee and stood up. They left a 20 on a $19 check and walked out into the same July heat Naomi was already walking through. She did not know she was being followed. She walked the way she had walked as a child, up Pinehurst, right on Cedar, down the long slope that led to Fairview Park. The park sat on the northern edge of Cypress Row, and Cypress Row was where the summer program met on Sunday afternoons. She had gone to that program in the summer of 1993. A woman named Miss Delphine had taught her long division on a folding chair in the shade of a pecan tree. Miss Delphine had been dead 12 years, but her daughter still ran the program, and Naomi had come to sit in the shade and watch it from a distance because she did not want to make Monday morning any harder than it was already going to be. The sign at the entrance to the park read Public Park, open sunrise to sunset. Below it, in smaller letters, this facility operates under the policies of Brackenridge County Parks and Recreation. Naomi read the sign. She read the smaller letters. She read the posted schedule for the summer program, which ended at 5 p.m. every Sunday. Then she walked to the third bench from the fence, which had a good view of the pecan tree and a good view of the parking lot, and she sat down. She took out her notebook because she had things to think about. On Monday morning at 8 a.m., she was going to walk into a building she had never entered as an employee, and she was going to inherit 22 years of trouble. She had accepted the position 3 weeks earlier over a phone call from a man in Washington who used the phrase consent decree 4 times in 7 minutes. The department she was about to lead had already had 2 chiefs in 18 months. Both had resigned. Neither had said why in public, but she had read the private reports and she knew why. She was writing down the first 3 things she intended to do on Monday when the first patrol car turned off Cedar and cruised past the entrance at 9 miles per hour. She noticed. She kept writing. The patrol car came back around 8 minutes later and parked at the far end of the lot, engine idling. The doors did not open right away. Naomi watched from behind her sunglasses without moving her head. The car had 2 occupants. The one in the passenger seat was on a cell phone. The one in the driver's seat was looking at her. She wrote one more sentence in her notebook, then she closed it and set her pen on top and folded her hands and waited. The 911 call came in at 4:16 p.m. It lasted 41 seconds. The caller identified herself as a concerned citizen and reported a suspicious woman who had been loitering near the children's area of Fairview Park for over an hour. The caller declined to give a full name and hung up when Amber Forrester asked for a callback number. Amber wrote down the incoming number on both her official log and her private notebook. The last 4 digits ended in the same 4 digits as the direct office line of Councilwoman Charlotte Kingsley, chair of the county's Public Safety Committee. Amber circled the 4 digits twice.
She did not say anything on the radio about the phone number. She dispatched the call because dispatching the call was her job. She wrote a small letter K in the margin of her private notebook and closed the drawer. Fletcher and Boyce were already parked at the far end of the Fairview lot when the call came through. That, too, was written in her notebook. She circled the timestamps. Fletcher took his time getting out of the car. He walked across the lot the way a man walks across a lot he has crossed 1,000 times, and he stopped at the third bench from the fence and looked down at the woman sitting on it as if he had been expecting her all afternoon. "Move it along, ma'am. This isn't your neighborhood. This isn't your bench." That was the beginning of what the record would eventually call case number 2025-000914. It was also the beginning of a longer accounting, one that would take 18 months to complete, and one Karl Fletcher had walked into with the confidence of a man who had done this kind of thing before and never once been asked to explain himself. She asked him a question first, and she asked it in the voice a schoolteacher uses on the second warning. "Is there a specific statute you're citing, Sergeant?" He did not answer her question. He asked one of his own, and it was the wrong one. "Do you have identification?" "I do." "Then show it to me." "May I ask what I'm being investigated for?" "Loitering, suspicious person, trespassing on public property. Take your pick. She did not reach for anything. She kept her hands where he could see them. The sign at the entrance to the park says the park is open until sunset. Sunset in Brackenridge County on July 27th is 8:42 p.m. It is currently 4:19. I have committed no violation of any posted rule. Boyce, who had been circling behind her, spoke for the first time. "Sergeant, she's arguing." "I heard, Detective." Naomi did not turn her head to look at Boyce. She kept her eyes on Fletcher, because Fletcher was the one standing close enough to hit her. "I'm not arguing. I'm asking for a lawful basis. If you're conducting a Terry stop, you're required to have reasonable, articulable suspicion of criminal activity. What is it?" The word Terry changed Fletcher's face. It did not change it much. It moved something in his jaw the way a small stone moves under a boot. He had heard the word before, from lawyers, from consent decree monitors, from federal auditors, from 3 different depositions. He had never heard it from a woman sitting on a bench in Cypress Row in July. "Ma'am, stand up." "I'd like to know why." "Ma'am, stand up. That's the second time I'm asking." She stood. She stood carefully, without turning her back to either officer, and she kept her hands visible. The notebook was already in her inside jacket pocket. The pen was in her hand. "Drop the pen." "It's a pen, Sergeant." "Drop it." She dropped it. It bounced on the concrete once and rolled 2 inches under the bench.
That was when Fletcher's hand came up. It was not a punch. He would say later, on paper, that it was an open-hand redirection of a non-compliant subject who had reached toward her jacket. Boyce would say the same words in the same order in his own supplemental report, which he would type up on a station computer 6 hours later, sitting 3 feet from Fletcher, both of them coordinating tenses. But that was later. The park saw an open-hand slap across the mouth of a woman who had just dropped a pen because she had been told to drop it. She did not fall. She did not raise her voice. She did not raise her hand. Her lower lip split against her teeth, and a small line of blood traced the corner of her mouth. She reached up with 2 fingers, touched the blood, looked at the fingers, and returned her hand to her side. If watching this makes you angry, hit subscribe, because the part that comes next is the part they didn't think anybody was going to record. Fletcher grabbed her upper arm and turned her around and pushed her chest forward against the back of the bench, and Boyce came in from the other side with cuffs already out of the pouch. The cuffs went on tight, tighter than they needed to be. Fletcher squeezed one wrist an extra click for a reason he did not name aloud. "You have the right to remain silent." "I'm aware." "Anything you say can and will be used against you." "I'm aware." "You have the right to an attorney." "Also aware." Boyce from her left said, "She thinks she's funny." "She's not funny," said Fletcher. "She's about to be booked." They walked her to the patrol car in front of 37 witnesses. Every one of those witnesses had a phone. At least 11 of the phones were recording. One of them, held by a 14-year-old girl named Mia Sherry, would be uploaded to social media at 7:12 p.m. that same evening and would have 400,000 views by sunrise. But that, too, is later. In the moment, Naomi Ambrose walked to the patrol car with her chin level and her spine straight, and she said only one thing on the walk, and she said it quietly enough that only Fletcher heard it. "You are being recorded, Sergeant, from at least 6 angles. I want you to remember that when you write your report." Fletcher did not answer her. He put a hand on top of her head and guided her into the back seat harder than he needed to. The door slammed. They drove her to the Brackenridge County Jail on North Adair Street. Booking took 47 minutes. They photographed her. They fingerprinted her. They inventoried her belongings, which consisted of a leather notebook,
a black pen retrieved by Boyce from under the bench, a Georgia driver's license issued to Naomi L. Ambrose with a home address in Fulton County, a house key on a plain steel ring, a debit card, and $142 in cash. The intake clerk, a heavyset man named Otis, spread these things across the counter as if he were arranging evidence. He picked up the driver's license. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at it again. Fulton County. What are you doing down here? Visiting family. What family? That's not a question I'm required to answer. Otis smiled, the smile of a man who has heard that answer before and has never once been impressed by it. Ma'am, when I'm processing you, you answer what I ask. That's how this works. When you're processing me for a lawful arrest, you have a set of intake questions defined by state statute. My family situation is not on that list. Otis stopped smiling. He returned the driver's license to the pile and slid the pile into a plastic bag and stapled the bag shut and wrote a case number across the staple in black marker. Charlotte Kingsley walked into the jail lobby at 6:02 p.m.
She was 58 years old. Her hair was silver at the temples in a way that looked professionally maintained, because it was. She was wearing a cream-colored linen jacket and cream-colored linen slacks, and she was carrying a leather portfolio she had never once been seen without in a public building. She was the chair of the county's Public Safety Committee. She had been re-elected 4 times without a serious challenger. She had endorsed the last 2 police chiefs, and she had personally called for the resignation of both of them for reasons she had never fully explained in open session. She had come, she told the desk sergeant, because a constituent complaint had reached her office. The constituent, she did not need to add, was her own assistant, a woman named Mia Sherry, and the complaint had been placed from a phone with the last 4 digits of the direct office line of Councilwoman Charlotte Kingsley. She did not say any of that. She walked into the intake area, gave Otis a nod he clearly understood, and settled herself into a plastic chair across from Naomi. She crossed her ankles. She looked Naomi up and down. She let the silence do a full 10 seconds of work before she spoke. "I'm told you gave the arresting officers some difficulty." Naomi looked at her without moving anything but her eyes. "I do want you to know, dear, that this county has enough of a reputation problem without outside agitators making it worse. Whatever you thought you were coming down here to prove, however this looks on your Twitter account, it isn't going to help these children in Cypress Row. It isn't going to help anyone." Naomi did not answer. "I'm going to speak to the Chief of Police tomorrow morning about how you were handled. I'm going to make sure Sergeant Fletcher's actions were within policy. If they were, this whole thing goes away by lunch. If they weren't, we'll deal with him internally. Either way, dear, you go back to Atlanta, and Brackenridge County goes back to work. Do we understand each other?" The word internally was carrying more weight than Kingsley knew. Naomi said, "You're referring to Chief Sanderson?" "I'm referring to the Chief of Police, yes. Chief Sanderson resigned 6 weeks ago." Kingsley's face did not move, but something behind it did. "I meant the acting chief. Acting Chief Hollister retired 11 days ago." "Then I'll speak to whoever's in that office tomorrow morning." "That would be advisable, Councilwoman. That would be very advisable." Kingsley stood up. She adjusted her jacket. She smiled, the smile a woman uses when she has decided a conversation is over. "I don't know who you think you are, dear, but you're going to find out in Brackenridge that name recognition works differently than it does in Atlanta." She turned to leave. She was 3 steps toward the door when Naomi spoke again, quietly enough that Otis could not hear her from the counter. "Councilwoman, your assistant placed the 911 call at 4:16 p.m. from a cell phone whose last 4 digits match your office line. That call is on the dispatch log.
It's going to be on the dispatch log tomorrow morning, and next week, and next year." Kingsley did not stop walking. She did not turn around, but her left hand tightened on the leather portfolio, and the tightening was captured on the lobby camera, and the lobby camera footage, unlike the body cam footage, had not yet been touched by anyone. They put Naomi in an interview room at 7:41 p.m.
The lieutenant who came to speak with her wore a plain white shirt with the lieutenant's bars pinned to the collar and had a nameplate that read Fraser. He was the commander of the Brackenridge County Internal Affairs Unit. He had been in the department for 19 years. He had personally reviewed and dismissed 11 of the last 13 use-of-force complaints filed against Karl Fletcher. He sat across from Naomi with a folder and a legal pad and a cup of coffee he had brought for himself and not for her. "Ma'am, I wanted it clear that this conversation is voluntary. You're not required to speak to me. If you'd like to speak to me, I'm here to hear your side of what happened this afternoon." "I understand. Are you willing to make a statement?" "I'd like to see the arrest report first." Fraser tilted his head. "The report hasn't been finalized yet." "Then I'd like to see the draft." "That's not standard procedure. Neither is being slapped on a public bench." Fraser took a long breath through his nose. He was smart. She could tell he was smart within the first 4 sentences. Smart and dangerous and patient. He had come into this room expecting a woman who would either cry or curse, and he was going to have to recalibrate. He tried the procedural angle. "Ma'am, I don't know what you came down here for. I don't know what your business is in Brackenridge, but I'll tell you what I do know. This town has been under a lot of pressure lately, federal pressure. There are people in Washington who want to make an example of a small southern county for their own political reasons. If you're one of those people, I want you to know we're not the enemy you think we are. We're just trying to do a job." "Ma'am, if you refuse to make a statement, I have to note that in the file. Refusal to cooperate can be considered when assessing charges." "Lieutenant, I'd like to correct you on one thing. Refusal to answer questions post-arrest is a constitutional right. It cannot be considered in charging decisions under Doyle versus Ohio. If it appears in your report, I'd like it removed." Fraser looked at her for a slow 4 seconds. "You're familiar with the case law?" "I read." "You read a lot, ma'am." "I do." He tapped his pen against the legal pad. He tried a second angle. He slid a form across the table and turned to Defacer. "This is a consent to search waiver. It authorizes us to review the contents of the notebook we recovered from your jacket. It's routine. It just speeds things along." "I decline." "You understand that declining doesn't prevent us from seeking a warrant." "I understand that seeking a warrant requires probable cause, and I'm interested in what your affidavit is going to allege." Fraser did not respond to that. He slid the form back to his side of the table. He tried a third angle, and the third angle was the one that told her exactly what she needed to know about Edwin Fraser. He leaned back in his chair, and he made his voice softer, and he said, "Ma'am, I don't know what you came down here for. I don't know what your business is in Brackenridge, but I'll tell you what I do know. This town has been under a lot of pressure lately, federal pressure. There are people in Washington who want to make an example of a small southern county for their own political reasons. If you're one of those people, I want you to know we're not the enemy you think we are. We're just trying to do a job."
She looked at him. She waited 3 full seconds before she answered. And when she answered, her voice was neither warm nor cold. It was flat, the way the surface of a pond is flat before something drops into it. "Lieutenant Fraser, I'd like to end this interview now." He held her eyes for a moment. Then he nodded once and gathered his folder and his legal pad and his coffee and left the room. They released her on a signature bond at 11:47 p.m. The charges on the release paperwork read, "Criminal trespass, Georgia Code Section 16-7-21, obstruction of a law enforcement officer, Georgia Code Section 16-10-24. There was a court date set for 4 weeks out. Otis returned her belongings one item at a time and had her sign for each of them. She signed with the same steady hand she had used on the bench.
She stepped out of the North Adair Street jail into the July night. The heat had not broken. Cicadas were loud in the trees. She stood on the top step of the courthouse for a long minute, and walked west and then south and then west again, and she did not go back to Cypress Row. She went to a small furnished apartment on the second floor of a building 3 blocks from the county administrative complex, which she had rented 3 weeks earlier under her own name. She let herself in, closed the door, turned the deadbolt, and stood in the middle of the small living room with her eyes closed for a full 30 seconds. Then she opened her notebook. She wrote down 11 things. She wrote down the badge numbers she had memorized. She wrote down the exact wording of every question Fraser had asked her. She wrote down the time Kingsley had walked into the lobby. She wrote down the 4 digits of the phone number Amber Forrester had circled in her private notebook, which Naomi could not yet have known Amber was keeping, but which she suspected existed because Amber had a certain kind of stillness on her radio voice, the stillness of someone who has been recording her own life. Naomi had heard that kind of stillness before, in other departments, in other jobs, and she had learned to trust it. The last thing Naomi Ambrose did before she slept was set an alarm for 6:30 a.m. She unclipped her watch and laid it on the nightstand beside the notebook. And in the top corner of the notebook's front page, in small, careful letters she had written 3 weeks earlier and never once opened the notebook without seeing, was a single line of type. Interim Chief of Police, effective 0800, Monday, July 28th. She turned out the light.
Monday morning came before the July heat did. At 6:30 a.m., the alarm on the nightstand rang once. Naomi Ambrose was already sitting upright when she reached to turn it off. She had slept 4 hours and 40 minutes, and it was enough. She dressed in plain slacks and a plain jacket, the same kind of clothing she had worn on Sunday because she wanted the department to see her the way she had let the park see her. She put the leather notebook into her inside pocket. She put a plain manila folder under her arm. She left the apartment at 7:41, walked 4 blocks east, and stopped at the front steps of the Brackenridge County Public Safety Building at 7:58. A young officer at the front desk looked up when she came through the glass doors. Her name tag read Carter. She was maybe 26. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her eyes tracked Naomi from the door to the counter with the careful stillness of someone who had already been briefed and was choosing to say nothing about it in front of the wrong people. "Good morning, ma'am," Officer Carter said. She did not say miss. She did not say Mrs. She said ma'am the way a soldier says it, quiet and level. "Good morning, officer. I have an 8 a.m. With Chief Halbert's office, ma'am." "That's correct." Carter picked up her phone. She said 3 words into it. She hung up. She stood and she walked around the counter and she walked Naomi past the metal detectors without asking her to empty her pockets. Behind Naomi, at the far end of the lobby, 2 patrol officers were signing off shift. One of them was Karl Fletcher. He glanced up as she walked past. He did not recognize her out of context, and Officer Carter did not slow down, and Fletcher's coffee cup was halfway to his mouth when he saw her disappear into the internal corridor and understood, in a way that arrived 4 seconds late, that he had seen her before. The coffee cup did not quite make it to his mouth. It stopped there, in the air, and stayed there for a full breath. At 8:02 a.m., Naomi Ambrose was sworn in as Interim Chief of Police in a small conference room with the county's Chief Judicial Officer, with 3 witnesses present. It was not on the department's public calendar. It had not been announced to the shift commanders. That, too, was a decision. The Federal Monitor's Office in Atlanta had asked for it that way, and she had agreed. At 8:17 a.m., an all-hands memo went out to every sworn member of the department. The subject line read, "Command Announcement, effective immediately." Karl Fletcher was still in the lobby when the memo pinged his phone. Naomi did not read the memo out to anyone. She did not need to. She was already in the 3rd-floor conference room, sitting across the table from Amber Forrester and a man from the Federal Monitor's Office named Jasper Blake. Amber brought her private notebook. Jasper brought a laptop. They spent the first hour of Naomi's tenure as chief walking her through what Amber had been quietly documenting for 3 years and what the monitor's office had been unable to prove until now. Amber turned to a page in her notebook. Her voice was flat, careful, the way it had always been on the radio. She said, "Sergeant Fletcher's body cam, yesterday, between 4:15 p.m. and 4:25 p.m. She paused. There is no footage. 10 minutes. Gone.
Jasper Blake turned his laptop screen around. The chain of custody report was on it. He read from the top line without any dramatics in his voice. Device serial number ending in 7429. Assigned to Sergeant Karl Fletcher, badge number 417. Upload log, timestamp, 23/11 Sunday. File integrity check, failed. Reason code, quote, manual deletion via administrative override, end quote. Administrative override credential, employee identification number 33089. Naomi wrote the employee identification number in her notebook. She underlined it once. "That number belongs to Lieutenant Edwin Fraser," Amber said quietly. "Internal Affairs. He was the ranking officer on duty last night. He is the only person who could have run that override." There was a silence in the room that was not really a silence. It was the sound of 3 people counting the same thing in their heads at the same time. If you're listening to this and thinking, they really did that on the very first night, hit like, because it gets more brazen. The CAD log came next. Jasper had already pulled it from the county's computer-aided dispatch server, and he had already cross-referenced the incoming number on the 4:16 p.m. call against the county's directory. He read the last 4 digits out loud. He read the direct office line of the Public Safety Committee chair out loud right after them. He read Charlotte Kingsley's office extension log for the same afternoon, which showed Mia Sherry logged into the office landline system from 4:10 p.m. to 4:22 p.m. The 4:16 call had been placed from a cell phone, but the cell phone belonged to Kingsley's office pool. Kingsley signed for it in April. Amber closed her notebook. She said, "I've been keeping this for 3 years, Chief. I didn't know when the right person to hand it to was going to walk through the door." Naomi looked at her. She said, "You handed it to the right person, dispatcher. Thank you." At 9:12 a.m., Naomi's phone buzzed with a message from Charlotte Kingsley's office. The councilwoman had called an emergency session of the Public Safety Committee for 1 p.m. that afternoon. The stated agenda, to reaffirm public confidence in the Brackenridge County Sheriff's Office and Police Department after an unrelated incident at Fairview Park on Sunday. She had not been told yet who the new chief was. She was going to find out at 1 p.m. in a public chamber in front of 2 local television cameras and a stringer from the Atlanta paper. Between 9 and noon, 3 men made 3 mistakes that were in fact the same mistake made 3 times. Jasper Fletcher went to Cassian Boyce's cubicle at 9:40 a.m. Boyce was at his terminal, typing his supplemental report. Fletcher leaned over the divider and said low, "You got to my part yet, where I said what?" Boyce answered without turning, "I got it. Open hand redirection, non-compliant subject reached toward jacket." Fletcher said, "Match my tenses. I already filed at midnight." Boyce said, "I'm matching." That entire conversation was captured by the ceiling mics in the bullpen, which had been recording continuously since 2022 under the terms of the federal consent decree, and which nobody in the bullpen ever thought about anymore because nothing they said had ever been used against them. Edwin Fraser went to Fletcher's locker at 10:15 a.m. and spoke to him for 6 minutes.
That conversation was in the hallway, out of range of the bullpen mics, but the hallway had its own camera under the consent decree, and while the camera did not have audio, it recorded the moment Fraser handed Fletcher a folded piece of paper and Fletcher put it in his pocket without opening it. And Charlotte Kingsley called Fraser directly at 11:02 a.m. on her office landline, which was logged by the county's phone system. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. That call would later be subpoenaed in the pattern or practice review.
None of the three men knew that any of the three things they had just done had been captured. At 12:45 p.m., Naomi Ambrose walked into the Public Safety Committee chamber through the side door reserved for county staff. She was still in the plain jacket. The manila folder was still under her arm. She sat down in the second row of the gallery, on the aisle, and she waited. Charlotte Kingsley entered at 1:03 p.m. She was late on purpose. She was wearing the same cream-colored linen jacket she had worn to the jail lobby the night before. She took the chair position at the front dais. She adjusted her microphone. She looked out at the gallery and did not see Naomi, because Naomi was sitting in the second row on the aisle behind Pastor Amos Bradley, whose broad shoulders made a very good screen. Kingsley's opening statement was practiced. It ran 3 minutes and 40 seconds. She used the phrase isolated incident twice. She used the phrase individual actor once. She thanked the men and women of the Brackenridge County law enforcement community for their service. She said, and this was on the record, "I want the public to know that this council retains full and unwavering confidence in the personnel of our department. Any suggestion otherwise is, in my view, opportunistic." Pastor Bradley rose to speak during public comment. Kingsley let him have 90 seconds. She cut him off at 88. He sat back down. His jaw was tight. Naomi Ambrose stood up. The moderator, a clerk who had worked the council for 11 years, blinked. Naomi was not on the public comment list. The clerk looked at Kingsley. Kingsley did not recognize her from behind at first. She waved a hand at the clerk that meant, briefly in her private shorthand, "Let her speak, then get her out of here." Naomi walked to the podium. She set the manila folder on it. She opened it. She did not touch the microphone. She said, "My name is Naomi L. Ambrose. As of 0800 this morning, I am the Interim Chief of Police for Brackenridge County, appointed pursuant to the federal consent decree entered in the Northern District of Georgia, case number 122CV0447. The chamber, for exactly 1 second, made a sound that was not a sound. It was the sound a chamber makes when 43 people all inhale at the same time. Kingsley's hand went flat on the dais. It did not move for several seconds. Her cream-colored linen jacket did not shift on her shoulders. Behind her, the 2 junior council members on either side of her leaned forward 6 inches without meaning to. Naomi did not raise her voice. She read from the folder, page by page, in the order she had arranged them the night before. She did not editorialize. She did not accuse. She read the following documents into the record, and each of them was clean, dated, authenticated, and printed on the county's own paper. She read the incident report filed by Sergeant Karl Fletcher, Badge 417, at 2342 Sunday, describing the use of an open-hand redirection on a non-compliant subject at Fairview Park. She read the supplemental report filed by Detective Cassian Boyce, Badge 291, at 2351 Sunday, using the same phrase in the same tense. She read the CAD dispatch log for the 4:16 p.m. call to 911, including the incoming number and the county's registration of that number to the Public Safety Committee office pool, signed out to Charlotte Kingsley in April. She read the body cam chain of custody report showing a 10-minute gap on device serial 7429, deleted via administrative override under employee identification 33089, which she noted for the record was assigned to Lieutenant Edwin Fraser of Internal Affairs.
Then she read a 5th document, which nobody in the chamber had expected. It was a transcript of the 11:02 a.m. call between Councilwoman Kingsley's office landline and Lieutenant Fraser's desk. The transcript had been produced that morning under a subpoena issued out of the Northern District of Georgia at 10:45 a.m. The county's phone system had produced the call metadata. The audio was not on the transcript. What was on the transcript was one line. Duration, 4 minutes, 11 seconds. Called party, Fraser, E, LT. Calling party, Kingsley, C. Councilwoman. Naomi looked up from the folder. She said, "I am not making an argument here today. I am placing documents in the public record. Each of these documents will be forwarded before end of business to the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division under the ongoing pattern or practice review authorized by 34 U.S.C. Section 1261, and to the Office of the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia for consideration of possible charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. She closed the folder. Charlotte Kingsley's mouth had opened 3 separate times and closed 3 separate times during the reading. She now spoke, and her voice was thinner than she wanted it to be. She said, "Councilwoman, your assistant placed the 911 call. That call is on the dispatch log. The dispatch log is a public record under Georgia's open record statutes. If you would like to characterize what happened on Sunday afternoon as a personal matter, I would encourage you to do so on your own time and in your own words, and not in this chamber." Charlotte did not answer that. There was no answer to it that was going to help her. Naomi turned from the podium. She walked back down the aisle. At the back of the chamber, Jasper Blake, the federal monitor, was standing in the doorway holding a folder of his own. He did not need to say anything. His presence was the sentence. 2 local television cameras panned to him and held. The stringer from the Atlanta paper was already typing on his phone with one hand while holding his recorder up with the other. Naomi walked out through the side door she had come in. If this is the moment you wanted, share this video. Because what happened over the next 6 months was slower and messier and more honest than the movies ever show. By Tuesday morning, Sergeant Karl Fletcher, Detective Cassian Boyce, and Lieutenant Edwin Fraser were on paid administrative leave pending internal review. That was not a firing. It was almost never a firing in the first week. Fletcher's union representative filed a grievance within 4 hours of the notification. Boyce hired a private attorney by lunch. Fraser said nothing to anyone and packed a personal box from his office in 15 quiet minutes and did not return anyone's calls for 6 days. The Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council opened a formal decertification review for Fletcher on the following Monday. That review would take 4 months. During those 4 months, Fletcher continued to draw his salary. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, which had already been operating a monitor's office in Brackenridge under the existing consent decree, expanded the pattern or practice investigation on August 14th. The federal monitor's term was extended by 18 months. Jasper Blake, who had been assigned to Brackenridge as a temporary detail, took the extension. Charlotte Kingsley resigned as chair of the Public Safety Committee on September 9th. She did not resign her seat. She issued a 2-paragraph statement that included the phrase, "to allow the important work of this committee to proceed without distraction." She did not admit anything. She did not apologize. She did not name Naomi Ambrose in the statement or in any statement she ever made publicly again. In October, the county's insurance carrier began settlement discussions with Naomi's civil counsel. She had filed a claim under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, alleging violation of her Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure. She had also filed a state law claim for battery under OCGA Section 16-5-23. The settlement was concluded in November for $475,000 paid by the county's liability pool. The city, as always, admitted no wrongdoing. The settlement agreement contained a non-disparagement clause on the individual defendants and the county, but not on Naomi, and Naomi's attorney had insisted on that asymmetry as a condition of settlement. In December, Karl Fletcher accepted a plea agreement in state court on a reduced misdemeanor charge of simple battery under OCGA Section 16-5-23. He was sentenced to 12 months of probation,
40 hours of community service, and mandatory de-escalation training. His POST certification was revoked in January. He was, at the time of certification revocation, 49 years old, with 22 years of service. He did not appeal. Cassian Boyce was indicted by a federal grand jury on January 19th on one count of deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, and one count of falsification of a federal record. His trial was set for the following September. He entered a not guilty plea. His case was still pending at the 18-month mark. Edwin Fraser retired on medical grounds in February. His pension was intact. The state's Judicial Standards Commission concluded that his conduct, while it fell short of the department's policies on evidence preservation, did not meet the criminal threshold for prosecution under state law. He was privately reprimanded. That reprimand was sealed. Naomi read it once, closed the folder, and did not open it again.
By March, the department under Chief Ambrose had adopted a new body cam retention policy that removed administrative override capability from any single officer below the rank of chief. Every deletion now required 2 credentials, one of them belonging to a civilian records officer employed by the county rather than the department. The policy was announced at a press conference. Whether it would be enforced in the long term was, as Amber Forrester wrote in the last entry of her private notebook before she began keeping a new one, a matter that only the next dispatcher would be able to say. Amber was promoted to shift supervisor in April. She kept the new notebook in the same top drawer. Officer Willow Carter, who had walked Naomi past the metal detectors on Monday morning without saying a word, was quietly moved to the chief's protective detail in May. She and Naomi never once discussed the morning of July 28th, but 6 months into the assignment, on a Thursday, Willow left a plain white envelope on Naomi's desk. It was sealed. It had no address on it. It had, in Willow's careful handwriting, only 2 initials in the upper right corner. Naomi did not open it. She put it in the top drawer of her desk next to her leather notebook and closed the drawer. The last thing that happened before the fiscal year ended was smaller than any of the things that had preceded it, and it was the thing that told Naomi she was not going to be able to finish this job in one term. On a Friday afternoon in June, roughly 11 months after Fairview Park, a records clerk at the Brackenridge Jail was pulling routine archive footage for a public records request from an unrelated defense attorney. The clerk was looking for a specific booking from 3 years earlier. She could not find the 10 minutes she needed. She flagged the gap and sent it up the chain. It came eventually to the chief's desk. 10 minutes of missing footage, different device, different officer, 3 years old, deleted via administrative override under an employee ID number that had been reassigned twice in the intervening years, but which, according to the department's original personnel logs, had once belonged to a supervisor who left Brackenridge in the spring of 2022 for a lateral position in the adjoining county's sheriff's office. That county's name was Chatterley. The deputy who had inherited the badge and the credential was still working there. Naomi read the note 3 times. She reached into her jacket and took out the small leather notebook. She turned to a fresh page. She wrote 1 word on the page and underlined it once. The word was Chatterley. She closed the notebook and put it back into her jacket. She looked at the top drawer of her desk, at the plain white envelope with the 2 initials on it that she had still not opened. The 2 initials were R.D. She left them where they were. Outside her office window, the Brackenridge County Courthouse flag was moving in a small wind that had come in with the evening. Somewhere in the building below her, a phone was ringing. Somewhere out on Cedar Street, a patrol car was pulling out of the lot for the 4 p.m. shift change.
And somewhere, 3 counties over, a deputy she had not yet met was signing his name on a body cam log for a device he had inherited from a man who had known Edwin Fraser for 22 years. Naomi Ambrose turned off her desk lamp. She had 18 months left on her interim appointment. She was going to need every one of them.